real struggle in the construction industry. And we wanted to supply some information on that to hopefully provide some solutions to that problem that you might be having. In fact, I was just looking at Velocity's website yesterday, which is really good, by the way, and I saw a stat that said 80% of global contractors can't find workers. So we are fully aware of that worker shortage that's happening in your industry. And that's yet another reason to make employee retention of the good people a top priority. And Ben's got some good red flags to kind of watch out for and some good insights on that. So again, this is just hopefully resourceful information for a solution to that problem that you're facing. And we know this has nothing to do with insurance, and that's what we specialize in, but thankfully we have the great resource that Ben is and that Velocity is to hopefully share some good solutions with us. So with that, I just want to introduce Ben. He is a partner at Velocity Advisory Group, and he leads the construction practice. He specializes and works with a lot of partners and executive teams to navigate growth strategies, succession planning, cultural transformation, all kinds of different things. He looks at the big picture and can find plans that that work for people to implement and really see some positive change. He's active in his community. He's a sought after speaker. We are so grateful that he is taking the time to spend with us today. He's out of Nashville, so that's a really fun place for him to be right now, but he is a UF grad, so he's a fellow Gator. So Ben, thank you so much for your time. I know this is going to be really valuable to everybody. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And then we will watch out for that chat box. So if you guys need anything, let us know.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. Great to meet everyone. I like that Casey drove home the fact that this should be interactive. And the Q&A shouldn't be all questions from you and answers from me. I mean, we get to see a lot of the way a lot of different organizations handle these challenges, and we're going to share some best practices, some tools, and things that are hopefully really helpful. But I also plan to propose some questions for you that hopefully, your answers will be helpful to others as well. So even if you have something that's adding on to something we're talking about, or a strategy, or an idea that you've implemented that's worked well for you and your team, and you want to share that with others, please, by all means, feel free to throw that in the chat, and we'll be able to share that out with the group as well. So I want to start with a question for you all. And first question is an easy one. How many of you have positions that you're currently trying to fill? Current vacancies, if you can throw that in there. Just a simple yes. Yep, already a couple coming in. Yes, 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 yes. Absolutely. That was the easy one. Now let's like the flip side, a little bit harder one, maybe a little more vulnerable. How many of you have lost a team member that you would have liked to have kept in the past year? Some yeses coming in there as well. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to walk through a little bit of a process here that I hope will be helpful to you, that'll help us to craft a formula that will be simple to implement, simple to understand, but allows a lot of room for customization. A consultant's favorite two words are "it depends," because that's our way of being able to say, oh yeah, it depends on your situation. But it's so true in this instance, because the approach and strategy that works best for you is dependent on your culture and your organization. What we're going to walk through is a couple of things. One, understanding why employee retention should be one of your top focus areas right now. It needs to be a top priority. We're going to share the 3 warning signs that your best people might actually be flight risks. So what to look out for proactively. And then finally, we're going to get clear on your employer value proposition. So what does that actually mean? How can you use that both to recruit new potential talent, but also use it to continue to retain the talent that you already have? So if we just go ahead and dive in, this should be obvious, but I want to drive it home with a few statistics or numbers. SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management, actually says that it's 6 to 9 months on average of an employee's salary is the cost to replace that employee, right? So the example is, if an employee makes $60,000 a year, you're looking at between $30,000 and $45,000 to recruit, train, onboard, get that person up to speed. But that doesn't even include the impact that it has on culture and team dynamics when you have continuous turnover, right? When you have those shifts in your team. And so we understand this. The construction industry understands this better than any other right now, because there's a combination of both historically low unemployment, but also a shrinking labor force while having increased demand, right? An increased demand for many of your services. And so it's creating this supply and demand challenge where there's just not enough labor force to fill all the open vacancies. And we're seeing it across all areas of the construction industry, everything from general contractors down to subtrades, home builders, AECs. It's happening across the board. And so that means that you have to be even more intentional about what it looks like to keep the people that you currently have. Now, obviously, you saw the title, The Great Solution to the Great Resignation. We've all heard this phrase, Great Resignation. The irony is there's beginning to be a coining of another phrase, a part two, or a follow-on story, if you will, of the Great Regret. And that's because you're having all of these people who have chosen to take the bait of another opportunity, of their next, job offer that they got, or the headhunter that reached out to them on LinkedIn, or the person that dropped off a business card and they took the bait for a couple extra dollars an hour, right? Many of you, if we could see show of hands, would probably have experienced that, where something so simple, but it worked because people were having this kind of itch to just change. That's what created this Great Resignation. What we're starting to see now is a Great Regret, where these people realize, well, the grass isn't necessarily greener, right? That opportunity wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. When in reality, they're just worse off than they were before. And so a lot of this is about saying, how can we work smarter, not just harder, to both keep our best talent, as well as continue to create a place where we can recruit talent moving forward. So a couple of practical things to kind of cover right off the start, just a couple of things to kind of think about. Even before the pandemic, the construction industry had a 21% turnover rate. Now, that's highest among most industries, but I bet for many of you, it's even been higher than that since then. Construction usually is what would be considered a high turnover industry, related to some others that are a little bit more stable from a workforce perspective, but especially the challenges of both the pandemic, the increased competition for talent, and the Great Resignation, it's making it even more challenging. So what can you do to improve employee retention? Well, there's two kind of buckets that we like to think about these things from. We're going to move through these kind of quickly, but want to cover the bases. The first is the financial offerings, and then the experience offerings. Now, financial offerings basically just means, are we being competitive across these categories, right? Are we offering competitive salary, offering competitive benefits? This generation, a lot of the current workforce is looking for performance incentives as well. Sometimes company performance, sometimes individual performance. And there's also perks that can be good differentiators or good opportunities. But really, I view these financial offerings more as make sure you're being competitive in these areas, but you're going to be better off competing on culture than you are competing on compensation. And so really what I want to look at are the experience offerings. And we break this into two categories, the opportunities for growth and then the support for growth. Now, the opportunities for growth are things like, do we promote from within, right? Or do our team members know what their internal career path looks like, right? If they choose to stay here for their entire career, do they have a vision for how that might play out, and where there is some optionality, right? Where there's some choices, where they can have some creativity within that too. Do we give employees a say in the direction of the company? And do we actually care what they say? And then do employees have a clear understanding of the organization's strategic goals? Now, I threw in an example here. We have a partner that we do organizational engagement surveys through called Custom Insights. And one of the things I really like about this service is that it benchmarks your scores against others in the construction industry, right? Because comparing certain survey items against a financial institution or against a healthcare institution is very different than a construction organization. But this statement right here, I have a clear understanding of this organization's strategic goals, is one of the 5 lowest scoring statements in the construction industry overall. So overall, organizations have a hard time really making sure their people understand the organization's strategic goals. Well, how am I supposed to know what my future looks like here if I don't know what the organization's doing, where it's headed, how we're actually going to get there? Similarly, on the support for growth, this is a partnership. This is where you get to lock arms with your team members to help make sure that they have what they need to be successful. It's kind of like the two-way street, right? We create the opportunity for growth with the support, but then it's up to them to make sure they actually take advantage of it. So these are things like, are our accomplishments acknowledged and valued? Recognition is key for this current workforce. Do they have the equipment and technology that they need? Do they have access to mental and physical health resources? They have opportunities to gain new skills and expertise. And are they informed about decisions and changes that will affect them? The last one there is pulled from, again, the data that we have through that survey. My manager always makes sure I'm informed about decisions or changes that will affect me. The lowest scoring item in the construction industry. So it's not even just organizationally, it's the direct relationship with that manager. Gallup was a massive research organization, actually came out with research within the past couple of years showing that the manager is basically the #1 indicator of an employee's engagement or satisfaction, is their direct manager. How well do they actually feel connected to that person? Is that person helping to carry down the mission, vision, values, strategy of the organization down into their day-to-day? So then if we look at the individual, right? If we say, if I were actually to have the time to ask you to write out your top potential flight risks, your top talent that you want to be most intentional about what we would call protecting, right? Talent protection is a huge element of maintaining a high workforce, right? Of retaining those people. And that means specifically focusing on retaining certain people that you know your organization would really struggle to lose or have to replace. So it's critical to identify these things before it's too late. Just a few to think about, 3 that I think are really key. Maybe that person's been less willing to commit to long-term projects than usual, right? You could probably experience that. That one might actually have a little bit of angst, right? A little bit of uh-oh, if you've noticed that before, where if you were someone who maybe usually jumps at the opportunity to work on that large project that's coming up, or even that internal project that you guys have been working on. Maybe it's something related to your strategy or an initiative internally, and they were a little less likely to jump on it. Maybe they cited a heavy workload or the timing wasn't right. Just might be worth kind of paying attention to. Another one might be that they've appeared less willing to go above and beyond. Maybe that's for the organization, but that also might be for their coworkers, right? If someone on their project team or someone in their department, they're not willing to really step up and go above and beyond, might be a warning sign. And then finally, this one's interesting too, that they become uninterested in pleasing their managers or less engaged in meetings than usual. Meaning like maybe they're just not showing the same level of engagement in that one-on-one, right? The metrics might still be there. Maybe their performance is still there. They're doing enough not to show up on the radar, but you can see it. And you know it and feel it when it's actually there. There may be others that you all have recognized, and if there are, please feel free to throw them in the chat as well. I'm sure others on the team would love to hear from you too. A few others that might be valuable is maybe they've expressed dissatisfaction more often than usual. They're a little more open in their concerns, their hesitations, or maybe they're even just less interested in overall company performance, right? They're still doing enough to get by on their work, but maybe they're not showing as much interest in the company's strategy or the company's goals or overall financial performance. Some things to pay attention to that are really important. So what do you do with this, right? What are some best practices? Once you've identified some of these things, how do you actually help to make sure that these people are staying tethered to the organization, that you're increasing their engagement and hopefully their commitment to the organization? Here's a few things to consider. 1, be proactive. Be proactive. Show a genuine interest in their growth, right? Ask them, what are your goals for your career? What do you want this next year or 5 years to look like in your life? And then really try to truly look at it and say, is what we're offering currently mapping to what that individual is expressing that they want? Use data, right? Whether that's an engagement survey like I shared that could be really helpful because it's quantifiable, or whether that's stay interviews or exit interviews, they can be super helpful as well. A lot of organizations do exit interviews where on the way out, maybe someone from HR will ask a few questions. In my experience, a lot of times they're kind of leading questions, or the leadership team might have a tendency to rationalize or dismiss that feedback anyways. So truly take that to heart, right? And look at it at face value for what it's worth. But something that can be really valuable too are these stay interviews, right? Find your best people, identify your top performers, and then go ask them, what is it about our organization that makes you want to stay? That does a couple of things that will help you to learn what's valuable, which will feed into your value proposition that we'll talk about here in just a minute. But it also might help you to pick up on some hesitations that they have. Or the irony is asking them why they stay might actually share the flip side of some hesitations that they might have, or ways that the organization can still continue to improve. But more than anything, it shows them that you care. It shows them that you're invested in that and that you're looking for ways to continue to enhance their employee experience, which is so key. A couple other best practices: embrace curiosity. At Velocity, this is one of our essential behaviors or core values, is embrace curiosity. Don't settle for assumptions. Many of you have been in the industry for a long time. You've led massive teams. You've seen lots of seasons of the business, lots of changes in the economy, maybe changes even to your own business model or your service offerings. And your intuition is going to be to assume that you know the cause or that you know what needs to be done. But I would just challenge you or encourage you to lean into that a little bit. Check in with your team, express some appreciation, but then listen with curiosity, right? Don't just listen to then respond immediately. Maybe don't even respond in a moment. Let it sit in for a day or two, and then you can come back and circle back if you want to. But open-ended questions or probing questions are really good here too. There's a big difference between, are you enjoying your job, and saying, hey, tell me about how you're feeling right now. So you're going to get two very different answers. Okay, so ask those open-ended questions and really lean into curiosity. And then finally, follow up. These meetings or these conversations should not be one-offs. They shouldn't be an anomaly. I encourage every leader that I work with to have scheduled, on the calendar, on a predictable cadence, right? Go ahead and schedule the occurrences. Scheduled one-on-one meetings with each of their direct reports. And then do your best to be present during that time. If all of a sudden the individual starts canceling those one-on-ones, well, that might be a sign that you need to lean in even a little further. But I guarantee you, through having those regular one-on-ones, you'll pick up on things that otherwise you may not in a fast-paced environment. Or if those of you that work with remote teams, or you have projects going on in a broad geographic region. So lean into that and use those one-on-one meetings because they can be really valuable. So the last thing I want to kind of leave you with here is how to go about crafting your value proposition as an employer. Now, if a client or customer or owner were to come to you and ask you why they should use your company versus one of your competitors in your local market, the odds are you'd be able to answer that pretty quickly and probably pretty clearly and convincingly. You'd cite maybe your safety record, or you'd cite your resume of projects that went smoothly or that were on time or on budget, right? But if I were to ask you to define your value proposition as an employer, you might hesitate a little more. And likely because we don't give a lot of time to this, right? Culture is an interesting thing, right? Culture is a lot of what creates that value for an organization. And we want to compete on culture, not on compensation. And so how clearly are you actually able to communicate your value proposition as an employer right now? It can be really challenging. And so let's dive into what this looks like. And typically this is a process we go through with a client, but I wanted just to leave this with you. I wanted you to be able to kind of do a self-guided journey if you want to here in these few minutes, or maybe you just take down some of the points and dig a little deeper, maybe throughout the next week or so. But the flow basically follows 6 steps. Identify your differentiators, study your prospects, study your competition, narrow that down to 3 value drivers, test the value chain, and articulate your value proposition. So we're going to walk through this briefly. First, you want to understand your differentiators. Now, I can tell you a lot of times the first couple of things that come to mind might not truly be unique about your organization. Now, I'm not saying these have to be things that you're the only company that's ever offered them or ever does this, but these are things that really are strong claims that you really might be the best, or you really might offer more of something. And it should be something that's verifiable, something that you can actually stand on, not something that just is your opinion, but that if you were to ask others, they would also cite your organization for being really strong in that area. List them. I'm a big fan of thinking on paper, right? We know these things. A lot of them are built into our intuition, into our experiences, into what we've seen and learned from others, but write them down. So capture what those differentiators actually might be, so you get a feel for how to, use them and lean into that. But we also want to study our prospects. We want to understand that the people that we're recruiting are actually our customers in this instance, right? They're the actual subject of that value that we're trying to communicate. So what are they actually looking for? And this is where generational trends come into effect. This is where understanding current trends within workforces, understanding what that you're being competitive on your salary or your compensation is important. You need to make sure that you can establish a baseline and understand what are they actually looking for, right? What matters to them? Because it may not be the same thing that mattered to employees 5-10 years ago, right? So we want to be current on this and really understand our prospects. This is a great opportunity to even lean in and ask potentially some of your more recent employees why they chose to work at your organization as opposed to others. Again, use data, right? See if you can gather that intel from them and apply it into how to continue that trend in recruiting others. There's some great research that one of my colleagues shared with me recently on the importance of the first 90 days of an organization. And if you can get someone to stay and keep them engaged for 90 days, the odds are dramatically higher that they'll stay for at least the first year. So a lot of organizations are putting much more time and emphasis into their 90-day onboarding plan. And it's not just a set it and forget it. You don't just give them a hard hat and send them on their way. No, but you really lean into it and you're thoughtful and intentional about it. Give them a mentor, pair them up with someone, have regular check-ins, show them that you value that, right? So understand your prospects' needs coming into it. But then you also have to study your competition. Because when we're talking about your value proposition, how you communicate it, how you actually take advantage of it, if you're saying the exact same thing that all your competitors are claiming, well, you're not going to stand out, right? It's going to feel like just the same repetitious style of claim. So what we want to do is understand our competitors. We want to see what claims they're making. Quick and easy way to do this, go check their website. Go on to a job placement or a hiring website like an Indeed and see what other companies are putting in their job postings. See what they're highlighting, how they're emphasizing certain things. So you understand, is there something you want to learn from that? But also so you can understand, well, what could make us stand out? What could make us unique? It's a great opportunity for creativity. Lean into that. It's so valuable right now. Traditionally, people have had to interview for jobs. In this current climate, the best organizations are recognizing that really the jobs are interviewing for the people. This is your opportunity to show someone why they should want to come work for you. So understanding what your competitors are claiming is a really important step. Once we have that, right, we've identified our differentiators, we understand what our prospects are actually looking for, and we've seen what our competitors are offering. I encourage you to narrow it down to your top 3, what we would call value drivers, and get clear on this. Here's just a few examples that have come out of recent sessions, like access to senior leadership. If that's something your company prides itself on, great. Let people know that. That's super encouraging to a new prospect. Or a voice in major decisions, right? That we don't just push things down the pipe, but like we bring the team together, or a wide variety of project types. Maybe it's something like, the opportunity that you have from a geographic perspective. Maybe it's something around an employee stock ownership program, an ESOP, if you have that or you have something similar. right? So look at saying, what actually can I narrow down to be really clear on the value that we can drive? But then comes an important step. You got to be able to defend it. So test it through what we'd call your value chain. When you've identified those top 3 value drivers, circle back and say, is this actually the case, right? Is this actually what we're showing day in and day out? Nothing's worse than a bait and switch, right? That's what's led to some of this great regret trend, where people were kind of bought into something and then it didn't live up. So they're not going to stick around because now they feel committed. No, people don't mind jumping jobs right now. They'll jump to the next one. So one of the things, again, go back to that survey process, I love to look at the scores of the difference in tenure for people that have been in the company less than a year versus those that have been there 10 years plus. Because as your culture changes, that's going to have an impact. As you're being more intentional and clear on the value that you provide, you want to make sure that the first year employees feel like what they were promised is actually being delivered upon. So go through your policies, go through that onboarding plan, go through the first couple of projects they're going to be assigned to, and make sure it actually matches up for what they would be expecting. And then finally, you just have to get clear on that and articulate it and make sure it can be shared easily and that you have places, avenues, channels that you can showcase it. Some great ones are on your website. The job posting itself, I strongly encourage organizations to list their core values in the job posting. However you can help people to envision what the culture is going to look and feel like, put it right there in the posting so they know what to expect. Even if it's an employee referral program, right? Your employees are great advocates for your job openings or how to grow your team. So equip them with the talking points. Tell them how to describe the culture or expectations, and then reinforce it throughout the interview process. Make sure that you can actually show that give people a sample of what it's actually going to be like. If you say you're a super supportive and encouraging and a fun team-oriented culture, but then the interview feels like an interrogation, well, the odds are they're going to feel that lack of congruence, right, from the start. So really lean into that. Make sure you've tested it all the way through, and then make sure you can articulate it with clarity. So I know we covered kind of a lot of ground, but I wanted to share some kind of the research and things we're seeing overall with some tips and tricks, but then also a formula that you can kind of walk through on your own that hopefully will help you get really clear on how to continue to retain your best people. And finally, I love this quote: the grass isn't always greener on the other side. It's greener where you water it. So help your people to understand that, right? That if you can get them engaged and bought in, help them to co-create the culture that they're a part of and experience, it's a great way to have them feel like they're invested in the future of the organization, not feel the need to take the calls from those headhunters or to, just scratch the itch of what that other opportunity may be. But I think this is also important for employers to recognize too, that we're going to have a lot more success continuing to invest in and develop our existing team than trying to continue to shovel water out of a leaky boat. So let's invest in our team. Let's continue to build strong organizations of enduring value. One of my favorite things to be able to do is just help leaders make good decisions. So if there's any way we can help you with that, be honored to do so. But I would love to take any questions you might have. And again, I'll open the same thing back up to others in the group that may have ideas and answers to some of those questions too.
Thank you, Ben. That was great. Lots of good info. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat box now. So if any questions come up, we'll certainly take those.
Awesome.
I'm not sure if you can see that, but we have James just you mentioned compete on culture, not on compensation. Do you have any other cultural ideas that employees value in this climate?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that your culture should support your business strategy, right? So if we think about a good culture, or we cited national brands that we know that are known for having strong cultures, well, the odds are they're actually very different experiences for employees. And so the Chick-fil-A is known for having a strong culture, but it's a very different culture than, let's say, a really well-run hospital system or surgical center, right? I mean, both can have strong cultures, but Chick-fil-A prides itself on consistency or on predictable customer service. Google's known for having a strong culture, but it's one of innovation and trial and error, right? I don't want a part-time kid innovating on my chicken sandwich when I'm on my lunch break, right? Or I don't want someone trying something new on me at a surgical center. So the culture has to support the business strategy of what actually you're intending to do. So I would encourage you to zoom out and look at it and say, where are we trying to go? And then what type of culture or environment do we need to create to help us get there? Because if it's one that's built on loyalty, right? Where you need consistent experience, where you want everyone to collaborate really well and get along really well, well, that's great. But the flip side might be a struggle with accountability, right? Or setting strong performance metrics. So being able to strike that balance and really understanding what works for your specific culture is the challenge, but also the great opportunity.
Thank you. We just got another question here. You mentioned differences in generation for what engages people. Can you speak to one specific between Gen Z and millennials and boomers, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of really exciting research coming out about Gen Z recently. Part of it is kind of a challenge because Gen Z is really entered the workforce over the past few years, and the majority of that time has been during a pandemic and a huge shift in the workforce overall. So that's kind of created a little bit of a unique dynamic. But the number one thing I would say is that do not assume that your younger employees are millennials. The younger employees coming into your organization are more likely Gen Z than they are millennials anymore. I see a lot of executives still continue to talk about millennials. Millennials are still the largest in the workforce right now, but there's a lot of Gen Z that are coming in, and Gen Z are built very differently. They do really enjoy having a social cause, but they're not going to be as hardwired for, they grew up with technology, so that's a little bit different than learning it, along the way, but they're not stuck to their phone. They do enjoy human interaction. They enjoy working in teams. Millennials, obviously they've been talked about for many years now, but one of the biggest things, especially with, you mentioned boomers too, is pairing your exiting boomers who are maybe in the last few years of their career, pairing them as a mentor with one of your younger team members to both keep that institutional knowledge or industry knowledge in-house, but also your Gen Z and millennials both enjoy that. They like the collaboration, they like the partnership. So if you can find some of your boomers to allow them to really walk into their purpose or to leave a legacy through that sort of partnership, it can be really valuable too. One of the biggest challenges we see, it's generational, but it's also kind of beyond that, are between shared services or support services versus field staff. And how do we create kind of some parity there when it comes to remote work or flexible work environment? We see that quite a bit. I am a believer that fair doesn't mean equal. There are certain positions, for example, where there's more flexibility around remote work and others versus some parts of the business. That's kind of the job someone signed up for. But what we can do is still take that and apply it and say, okay, if that's an area where they might need an additional incentive or an additional perk because they don't have the same flexibility someone else does. So it is still about zooming out and making sure that there's fairness, even though it doesn't necessarily mean that it's equal policies across the board too.
Makes sense. Good. Any other questions for Ben that he can answer now? He did supply his contact information. Like I said, we'll be sending that out too, but if you have something now, it's a great opportunity to throw it out there and bounce ideas off of each other. Another minute or so. Let's see, any good questions? Okay, so any good questions for interview related to culture?
Yeah, I'd love to hear if anyone attending has good examples too, because I always learn something when people start to share those type of ideas. But I think there are some really good ones. We even use a tool that we call the user guide for working with me, which hits on some of these same topics, but asking them even about the type of environment that they enjoy. And that's where, again, I prefer asking open-ended or probing questions as opposed to something that's closed-ended, meaning like a yes, no, or multiple choice. Give them room to explain the type of culture that they enjoy. Will help you to avoid asking leading questions, right? You don't want to say, there's a big difference between saying, can you describe to me the type of culture that you feel like you work best, versus saying as an interviewer, well, we're a really collaborative team. We work great together. Do you like that? Right? That you want to ask in an open-ended way so that they can speak honestly, and then you can evaluate, does their answer feel like it aligns with what you know the culture to be? So I really prefer that. But again, part of that comes back to what's unique about your culture. If you've gotten clear about your intentional culture, because every organization has a culture, it's just a matter of, is it organic? Like it came about by happenstance because of our combination of personalities and history and past experiences, or are we being intentional about what we want it to be? And if you've gotten clear on what your intentional culture is, I would take some of those specific items and frame them in the form of questions, right? If you know as an organization that you prioritize, innovation, well, then I would form an interview question specifically targeting innovation, maybe around specific examples of times that they've found an opportunity to improve a process, and they really were able to act on it or bring it to the surface or communicate it to senior leadership and find a solution for it. So once you get clear on what that culture is, just take some of those topics and reframe them as interview questions.
So another one, let's see. Everyone we talk to is so busy. How do you suggest giving new or young employees access to leadership and a voice in major decisions?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, this one depends on the scale of the organization, right? Which is something that I've had to work on with a few executives that I have the pleasure of coaching, where in the early stage of the organization, they loved having an open door policy. And that's something they prided themselves on for many years. But now they're leading a team of several hundred employees, for example. And it's really hard to have an open door policy for that many people, or having everyone be able to right away call the senior leader. So that's where I think the value of relationships with their direct manager is key, right? And that can't just be a way to defer the senior leader to say, well, go talk to your manager about it. There's value to the hierarchy, there's value to the flow. Otherwise, we have what's called seagull management, where a senior leader just swoops down and all of a sudden picks up a French fry and then swoops back up, and it leaves the manager in between feeling undermined or out of the loop. So I really encourage senior leaders to work on just coaching and developing your people. And part of that coaching and developing is helping them to coach and develop their people. Because when we have that two-way communication, that flow both up and down, it's a great way to continue to gather that input, harness that value, but it's much more scalable, because one leader, a senior leader, may not be able to reach the entire company anymore. But it's still important that we give them that voice. And then obviously there's technology, doing regular engagement surveys, even pulse surveys on specific things, which are basically much smaller, quicker surveys, but on specific things that you've implemented that you know are crucial in that time, or around a major decision. I've seen organizations even do that. If they're approaching a major decision, they'll put it out there and let their people give input towards that timely, topic that they're discussing too.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we are just about out of time. I think that's all the questions that have come in. Actually, one last one. In studying your competition, what claims are you hearing from companies who have been stealing employees?
Yeah, it's kind of unique, because through the Great Resignation, we actually don't hear people even complaining about that as much, because now it's kind of thought of as, well, it's just part of the game. Everyone's switching teams, right? They're all moving around. But that's where I think it's more about putting on the lens of talent protection, right? How do we protect our team rather than trying to stop the opponent, right? Rather than trying to stop our competitors from coming after them. I personally prefer to take more of a free market approach where I just want to create a good enough environment that my people don't want to leave, right? That like they want to stay, that this is their best option. It's not that they can't, be exposed to other things. It's that even when they see that, they're like, no, that's not going to be better than where we are right now. And we've seen some companies, even in the construction industry, that have been so good at that they've had almost no turnover, even through the pandemic, because they've created such a strong culture. They live out their values day to day. Their people feel like they matter. They're recognized and appreciated, and they're competitive on the other items too. But really, the differentiators, the value for them, are more of the soft skills. It's more of the intangibles within the culture that have been the biggest, value adds, are the biggest contributors to their high retention numbers.
That reminds me, I just saw a quote with John Gordon's newsletter that he does, I think it was yesterday, that talked about if people could just stay focused on winning rather than not losing, and they would stay ahead. So that's kind of focusing on keeping their people and not so much how to prevent losing them, but same
Great
concept.
point. Absolutely. I love that, Casey. That's a great point.
All right, so I think we can wrap up. Ben, we can't thank you enough. We're so grateful for your time and all the insights that you shared, and grateful to everyone who attended as well. Hopefully this was valuable and helpful to you to bring some clarity and some motivation to keep your people and to grow. And that's what we want to see. We want to see everybody succeed. So we'll send out the recording and Ben's contact info. If there's anything that we can help with, please let me know. But Ben, thank you.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.